my friends are simps. So I bought a Sony A7 IV, and in actual fact that is what you're watching me on right now, coupled with a Sigma 16mm f1.4 lens. Now regular viewers of this channel might be a wee bit surprised by this purchase, not least because I have been having something of an existential crisis, at least in regards to my relationship with photography. I was once something of a photographer where I paid my way through university by taking photos for newspapers and nightclubs and magazines and all that kind of thing, but as of late I've found myself really losing all of my motivation to take pictures, and that's been a bit of a blow because photography has been a big part of my identity and kind of something that I used as a form of self-expression for a long time. And obviously the way that I decided to combat this or try and tackle it was to buy a new camera. Now that might well prove to be a fool's errand, but I decided to do a video talking about why I wanted to get one of these things, and maybe in years to come I'll look back in this video as a turning point where I rekindled my passion for the photographic art form, or perhaps more realistically I'll look back in this video and see it as the final nail in the coffin. But either way we'll see. Now, I didn't pay full price for this camera, which probably makes things slightly better. Sony didn't give me a discount or anything like that, although if they want to, I am completely open for sponsorship/bribery opportunities. I paid about £2,000 for the body on its own from Wix in Scotland, or Wix in the UK, I guess. It was one of their used section. But even then, it was still one of the most expensive cameras that I have ever bought. It wasn't as if this was a kind of, a cheap thing that I was going to test out. So it was a bit of an extravagant purchase for what could well prove to not be all that helpful, but hopefully it is. Now, for those of you that are not familiar with the Sony A7 IV, it is one of their most recent high-quality mirrorless cameras. And if you're watching this video to find out more about the detailed technical specifications of the camera, then this is probably not the one for you. I have a few core features about it that I think are really important and interesting, and which drove me to buy this particular camera, and I'm going to talk about them. However, when it comes to things like, the fantastically high megapixel rate, or, the new autofocus system that can lock onto an ant in a sandstorm or something like that, I just don't really care about any of that. That isn't something that interests me at all. In general, actually, the truth is that modern cameras haven't interested or excited me for a long time. The last camera that I think I was excited about was the Leica M-Type 240. It was a manual focus rangefinder digital camera, and it was released back in 2013 or something. I got mine in 2015, and that's actually the most expensive camera I've ever bought, coming in at about £3,000. But I haven't actually bought any camera since then that was on the same level with it, at least not one with interchangeable lenses. There were some that I've enjoyed and I use for specific purposes, like the Ricoh GR Mark III, but other than that, you kind of have to go back to the Canon 5D, which was 2005. Every other kind of offering by modern camera manufacturers just hasn't really enticed me over. Particularly, I have to say, Sony, because even though their cameras are really good, and I know that the sensor performance and everything has been great, I do have a Sony A7, an original one. They're actually disgusting. They're really horribly ugly cameras. I find them really counterintuitive, really sharp, jaggy plastic that feels cheap and nasty, not ergonomic, not nice to use at all. They're just these kind of monstrosities, actually. Now, all of this might further beg the question of why I've decided to, invest quite a significant amount of money in a Sony camera particularly, and so hopefully I'll be able to explain some of those reasons now. Now, along with the disgusting looks of these Sony cameras, I'm also not a big fan of the sheer size of the lenses that you need to get. If you were to get something like a 35mm f1.4 on a Sony mirrorless camera, it is going to be about the size of a 24-70 f2.8 on a Canon SLR, and I don't really want to have a smaller mirrorless camera that I then have to hoist this giant lens onto. It just doesn't make any sense to me. I'm sure there are, of course, technical reasons for this, but it's still not exactly brilliant. Now, the first reason I decided to buy the Sony A7 IV was quite simply because I wanted a new camera. Now, I am joking a wee bit there, but I'm also kind of not, because I haven't really bought a modern professional level camera in a very, very long time, and technology has moved on exponentially from the cameras that I've actually got in my collection. Now, I do still love shooting with things like my old, very old actually, Canon 1DS Mark II. It's an old full frame professional level SLR camera, and I think it in particular is great for certain situations. So like in nightclubs, I think it still performs perfectly, reasonably. It actually probably outperforms some modern cameras in certain ways in that regard as well. However, it kind of falls down in a number of areas that are actually quite important, and which mean that it isn't as useful for other situations. So for example, the screen in the back is simply terrible. It's one of the worst screens I've ever seen on any digital camera, to an extent that when I'm taking pictures, I can't actually tell whether they're any good or not from the camera, or at least the screen in the back, because the resolution is so poor, you just can't tell. And that isn't as important in a nightclub where I know the kind of the lights and the environment and everything else. But if you're in a gig and everything's moving quick, then you do need a better screen sometimes. Similarly, with my Leica M-Type 240, I love using that with my manual focus lenses, but sometimes I wish the screen in the back was a bit clearer so that I could nail that manual focus, especially with wide apertures. High ISO performance is another one that's really important to me as somebody that spends a lot of time in kind of dingy, dark places. And modern cameras just have better ISO performance. Again, autofocus, if I'm at a gig and I'm shooting a bigger, stage event or something and people are moving around a lot, I don't really have cameras that have that capability anymore, and so I'm kind of being left behind a bit in terms of the quality of the images that I'm able to produce. Now you of course don't need modern cameras in order to produce good images, but there are some specific technical improvements and upgrades that over time would be really useful for certain situations, and so I wanted to get some of those upgrades and capabilities so that I could start to take those kind of photos again and, be as good as I kind of thought I was. Maybe. Now, I mentioned manual focus lenses, and over the years I've amassed a bit of a collection of weird and wonderful optical obscurities, and in actual fact that's one of the things that I still really love about photography, experimenting with these unusual lenses that have got a particular or distinct character. And I don't really love modern digital lenses at all for that reason. They might have a lot of clarity and detail and be fast and all that kind of stuff, but they lack a bit of the soul that I really enjoy using in practice. One of the things that I really love about the Sony E-mount series in particular is the fact that you can get a whole host of different affordable adapters that allow you to use a disparate range of lenses on this modern camera, and it can really help to bring those old lenses to life. I'm talking about things like the Canon 50mm f/0.95, the Helios 40-2 85mm f2, the Otto Yashinon Tomioka 55mm f1.2. The list goes on and on. They look fantastic in digital bodies once you can nail the focus and everything, and I'm excited to use them on the A7 IV. The compatibility of lenses like this with the E-mount series is something that you just can't get with something like a Canon SLR or a rangefinder or anything else. So having this kind of multi-purpose vehicle for artistic expression is actually really cool. This leads me on to the next reason why I bought an A7 IV, and that is that it has a full frame high quality sensor in there. Now, a year or so ago I bought a Sony ZV-E10, which is this wee kind of vlogging camera which has got an APS-C sensor, and it has lots of great qualities. I've been using it to take pictures. However, because it's got an APS-C size sensor, that means that if I put a 50mm manual focus lens on there, it becomes a 75mm equivalent or something like that. So I can't really make the most out of my manual focus lenses or my vintage manual focus lenses with an APS-C camera. And so I wanted some of the quality and improvements that I got from the ZV-E10 with a full frame sensor so that I could get the full benefit of the focal length and everything. Now, if I was only going to be using this camera for photos, then I could probably have gotten away with the Sony A7 III, which would have been markedly cheaper. It's got a full frame sensor and all those kinds of things that I would need for my photographic endeavours. However, because I'm outlaying a wee bit of money, I wanted to also be able to use the camera that I bought for video purposes. Obviously I'm recording things for YouTube all the time now, and it would mean that I didn't have to carry about multiple bodies if I was going abroad or something like that. I could use a single camera for everything. Now the A7 IV specifically has two main features that help with recording video that the A7 III does not. The first is the fact that on the A7 III it only has a flippy screen, so it doesn't come out and allow you to view yourself whilst you're recording. That's actually quite a big deal if you're sitting in a room yourself. You can't see if some things are in focus or what you're doing. Having the screen here is actually a huge benefit, and you can't see it, but my face is just over there. Now, aside from, you know, the fact that I want to be able to see what I'm doing when I'm recording video, it's not just about vanity, but there is another feature of the A7 IV which makes video recording much better. That is the fact that this does not have a limit on the length of video recordings. Older cameras, and including older Sony cameras, all have this limit of 29 minutes or 21 minutes or something like that. That was imposed by a whole host of weird and wonderful regulatory kind of consequences, but the A7 IV doesn't have that. Same in the Sony ZV-E10 actually, but basically means I can keep recording indefinitely, or at least until the camera overheats and shuts off, which is actually done once whilst I've been recording this video, so it better not fucking make a habit of it. But that's one of the reasons that I got the A7 IV instead of the A7 III, because I don't have to deal with, you know, the video recording just stopping after 20 minutes and me not realising and then having to go back and record it all. So yeah. Now, another reason why I decided to get the A7 IV in particular was that I've read a lot about how some of the specific issues that I've had with previous models have been updated and improved. So for example, the ergonomics on this camera are so much nicer than all of the previous ones. Gone are the cheap crappy plastic edges and everything that I hated on the A7, and instead it's got a much chunkier grip on here, which makes such a big difference. Usually I feel like I need to get a battery grip for any Sony camera to make it feel sturdier and nicer in my hands, but that also makes it harder to carry about, less portable and all that kind of stuff. And the A7 IV feels perfectly fine on its own without the grip. I'm really pleased with that because it was a big concern of mine. And now, to be honest, it feels much more balanced. It kind of has the feel of an old Canon SLR, kind of like the 5D that I mentioned. It just feels so much better in my hands, and I'm so glad that's the case. The other thing that people said was improved was the menu settings and the kind of layout of the menus, because Sony are infamously crap at having kind of intuitive menu systems. When you look in there, you can never really find what you want. Nothing seems to be in a place that makes sense, and sadly that is still the case. There are so many options in there that you just have to kind of go through them until you find what you desire, but I don't find it particularly more easy to navigate than any of their other offerings. But, you know, hey, I'm willing to put up with a convoluted menu structure, particularly because there's lots of buttons you can assign to different functions, so I don't need to dive into the menus as often, and that's quite nice. Now, my big hopes and dreams with this camera are that it will somehow rekindle the fire and passion that I once had for photography, and whilst that may be a bit of a ridiculous thing to do, I have found that over the past few days, as I've been using it, I've been more inclined to take it out of my bag, and I've enjoyed the process of taking pictures again. There are certain features of this which I didn't expect to be useful or to enjoy, and which have actually proven to be so. For example, the silent shutter mode helps me be less intrusive, or at least feel less like I'm in people's faces when I'm taking photos. There's the fact that there's a double SD card slot in there. There's a whole host of things that I'll talk about in another video, but so far, things are looking up. Overall, at this point anyway, I'm really glad that I bought a Sony A7 IV. It's probably about time that I dragged myself into the modern era when it comes to digital cameras and everything anyway. And the next problem that I've got will be deciding on what lenses I'm going to buy, because obviously I love my old manual focus lenses, but I do also need to get some decent autofocus lenses that aren't just APS-C lenses like I use in the Sony ZV-E10 in order to take advantage of all of the capabilities of this thing. So I'll be looking into that in the near future. Hopefully the overheating thing doesn't give me too much hassle, because if it does, I'll not fucking be happy. If you happen to have a Sony A7 IV, or you have any particular lenses that you want to recommend, please do so below, because it seems like an endless sea of possibilities at the moment, and I'm not entirely sure I can financially afford the hit. For now, thank you for watching, and if you want to look at some of my photographs, you can find them on allmyfriendsarejpegs.com. Trademarked, by the way. That's trademarked. Bye.